Hi, good evening, everyone. Tonight, our speaker, Roy Romsey, is very well known to Magna members because he's not only a founder member of the club, but he was also the founder president. And this evening, he'll be sharing with us his great interest in stained glass windows and will be giving us a potted history of their origins. Roy is also a professional photographer, and so he'll be taking us on a tour of Romsey Abbey, describing the stained glass windows through photographs. He's also judged the photographs handed in by students, taking part in the Rotary Young Photographer competition held by the club, and we'll be showing a couple of the winning entries. So over to you, Roy.
Well, hello everyone. Thanks for attending the meeting tonight. It's good to see you all. My talk will be about the stained glass windows at Romsey Abbey. It can be said that the purpose of stained glass windows in churches is to enhance the beauty of their setting and to inform and inspire the congregation through the narrative and symbolism. However, perhaps at this point, I should say that religion is not a particular interest of mine, so I'll not be commenting on the religious aspect or content of the various stained glass windows. Before I go too far, I think it might be helpful if I gave you a brief history of Romsey Abbey itself. It's the third church to be built on the site. The first church was a wooden structure built in 907 as a Benedictine nunnery. It was built by King Edward the Elder in 907, and it was built for his daughter Elfrida, a granddaughter of Alfred the Great. And she became the first abbess of Romsey. Well, 85 years later, the Danes came up the River Test and rampaged through Romsey. They burnt the church down and caused general havoc. Fortunately, the nuns escaped to Winchester. However, However, I fear an ancestor of mine may not have escaped. You see, I'm from Romsey and I've got blonde hair, so I may have been the product of some of their rape and pillaging that was going on, but who knows? That's another story, but I digress. Anyway, let's continue. 7 years after the Danish invasion, a new small church and nunnery was built, but this time it was built of stone. But within 120 years, it had outgrown its purpose, and the new building of a new abbey was started in 1120, which incidentally was cause for the Abbey to celebrate its 900th anniversary last year. Unfortunately, COVID-19 put a stop to most of the planned celebrations. The Abbey thrived for several centuries as a nunnery and as a seat of learning for the daughters of those people who were in power at the time. However, during the 15th and 16th century, general discipline became lax within the Abbey and scandal became rife. The nuns were known to pop into the town for a pint and a watch your pleasure. And it was a time when there was much corruption within churches and religious orders. And it all came to a head during the 1500s, when England broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. Then in 1538, the dissolution of the Monasteries Act came into being. The act allowed Henry VIII to sell off most of the church property, and it allowed him to get his hands on extra income and assets to fund his various military adventures. 6 years later, in 1544, he sold the abbey to the town for £100, and that's how Romsey came to own its own abbey. It was during this period of history that all stained glass windows and items of idolatry were torn down from churches, committed mainly by Puritans under Oliver Cromwell. The following 250 years was not a good time for churches. Many fell into disrepair. Romsey even lost its roof, and it was without a roof for many, many years. But history moves on, and with it, the fortunes of the country changed. The Industrial Revolution and the UK's expansion overseas caused Britain to become very wealthy. Cities grew with people moving from the countryside to find new forms of work. and bigger cities required more churches. In 1820, the government granted £1.5 million to build and refurbish thousands of new churches throughout the land. Most churches at that time cost around £4,500 to build. This explosion of building work resulted in a huge resurgence of stained glass windows. Over 80,000 stained glass windows were produced during the late 1800s. They were financed occasionally by small groups of people with local subscriptions, but in the main, they were financed by wealthy benefactors as memorials to record either their loved ones or more often themselves. They were often thought of as an indulgence ticket for a safe passage into heaven. The windows would typically cost upwards of £45,000 in today's money, and with some companies employing as many as 400 people to keep up with the demand. Most of the stained glass windows at Romsey Abbey were installed from 1864 and onward up to about, I guess, 1910. There are a few were installed after that, but not very many. They were designed and produced by a number of different companies, but most notably, they were done by the companies of Clayton and Bell, Alexander Gibbs, Kemp, James Powell and Son, and a few others. So I think we should now have a look at some of them. So if you give me a moment, I'll try and share my screen and see if we can get some pictures going. Are you
Yes, yes, that's good. You've got it, Roy. You've got it.
Okay, it's not what I wanted, but it'll have to do.
No, that's it. Off you go. Yes.
We'll take it forward from here and see how we go.
Yes.
There's 24 windows in Romsey Abbey featuring stained glass. Windows are quite often signed in the bottom right-hand corner with the artist's hallmark, either with initials or with a symbol identifying the artist. However, such hallmarks are difficult to see in Romsey Abbey because the windows were above eye level and therefore obscured by the window ledges. This is the first window to be seen on your left as you enter the Abbey by way of the main north door. It's by Alexander Gibbs. He was from a family of very talented and prolific stained glass designers from London. Alexander started his own business in 1858, and it's an enterprise that continued until 1915. This is part of the same window as a detail from it. You can see there's an incredible amount of detail and work that goes into the making of these windows. It looks as though I don't have the full, or maybe I do. Let's try going down the side here. Okay, this is another Alexander window, Alexander Gibbs window rather, and this was installed in 1874. Again, full of detail. I try and pick up a little bit of the detail here. We then move on to the third window, and this one was installed during the 20th century. It's by Francis Skeet, and it was installed in 1951 in memory of Canon Corbin. He was a vicar for 27 years from 1925 until 1951. It's a first-person memorial in so much that it's a gift from himself in memory of himself, which probably explains why he features in the centre and is surrounded by 9 shields representing various aspects of his life and career. The halo around his head is the only obvious religious content in the window. So I guess he was hoping for a very safe passage into heaven. Moving on to the fourth window. This is installed in 1901 by the company called James Powell and Sons, and it's in memory of Roy Romsey of Lincoln's Inn. The family connection with Romsey is traced back to Sir Walter de Romsey, a knight from the 12th century. Possibly it was a play on the word Romsey, as they call themselves, Romsey. There's another detail from that same window there, and this is the inscription at the bottom: in loving remembrance of Roy Romsey of Lincoln's Inn, barrister at law, professor of Indian jurisprudence, King's College, London, born 1825, died 1899. The window is placed by his sorrowing widow. We move on to an interesting, for some reason or other, there it is, there's the whole window. This is a window, which is another James Powell window dedicated to the Reverend Bertham from 1813 to 1899. Reverend Bertham was a local inventor. He was an astronomer and also a boat builder. And it was due to him that he was responsible for much of the major restoration work which was required in the Abbey during the 1800s. He used the extensive skills employed by his boat building company to do a lot of the restoration work. The window is full of detail. It depicts the family of Jesus and many of the tools and interests of Bertham. However, one wonders about some of the content of the window. Let me just go into something and show you. There's some balls of knitting wool and some knitting needles there. Quite what that's got to do in a religious content, I cannot imagine. If we scroll down to the bottom, that's the gentleman himself. This is one of his boats he invented, which is a lifeboat, an unsinkable lifeboat, and his interest in astrology, of course. If we move to the next one, which is the sixth one, let's go down. This is a charming window. Let me just pull out from that a little bit. This is a difficult to see window, but it's a very charming Lancet window. It's high up in the gables of the north transept. And the only way you can see it is to stand way off in the south transept and look back behind you. And at the very top underneath the roof, you can just make this window out. It's thought to be by Alexander Gibbs from the 1860s. It's called Angel of Music. And we think it was put there as a reminder that an organ once stood in that particular area. But it's a beautiful window. Now the next window is the very latest one to be installed into the Abbey. It was installed last October, that was 2020. It's dedicated, or will be dedicated in a special service next month. It was delayed by the COVID-19 restrictions in 2020, and it's dedicated to commemorate the bicentenary of the birth of Florence Nightingale. It was designed by Winchester artist Sophie Hacker. Many of the aspects of Nightingale's professional and personal life are symbolically represented in the design. For example, she's sitting on a stone bench at Emily Park. There is a nightingale just here. These are 4 buildings here representing different parts of her life. the hospital in London where she did some of her work, and a building from Italy in Florence, where she was in fact born, and various flowers which were associated with Embley Park. The colours are somewhat cold compared to the colours in the other windows in the Abbey, which are fairly bright and warm. This colour palette is very cold, cold greens and cold blues and blacks. Whether it was deliberately designed to be cold, or whether it was a part of the process of creating the colours onto glass in the first place, I don't know. The next one is a beautiful window. In fact, it's my favourite. What I should do is say, before I go away from this one, if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, let me see if I can enlarge it for you. The bottom right-hand corner, just in here, you'll see there's a symbol which represents the 21st letter of the Greek alphabet, which is in fact Phi. Phi is the second syllable of her name, Sophie, Phi, as in Sophie. So that's how she signs all her work. Other artists use different symbols, but I thought I'd just point that one out. It's one of the few that you can see in the Abbey. This one is probably the finest window in the Abbey, and certainly my favourite. It's designed by a Pre-Raphaelite artist, Henry Holliday, for the James Powell Company. It's entitled Healing the Bedridden, and it's in honour of Sibella Ashley. She was the first wife of, my memory escapes me, but first wife of one of the members of the Ashley family at Broadlands, which later, of course, became the home of Lord Mountbatten. She passed away aged just 40 in 1866, following a prolonged illness. But the colours and draftsmanship of this window is outstanding. It illustrates the Bethesda pool in Jerusalem, which was supposed to have healing powers after being stirred by an angel. The name Bethesda is Aramaic, from the Aramaic language, believed to mean house of mercy, or perhaps place of flowing water. No one's totally sure. Let's see if we can show some of the detail that's in this one. It's absolutely beautiful. It's well worth visiting when you go to Romsey Abbey and just studying some of the detail in the picture, and don't just take it in as a picture, but look at 100 different pictures within the picture. There we go. Most loving memory of Sibella Ashley. The next window is by an artist called Kemp, and it's in St. George's Chapel, and it shows St. Michael slaying the dragon. Now, in case you're wondering why it's St. Michael slaying the dragon and not St. George, I'm afraid I have no idea. I would have to look it up. But apparently it's St. Michael slaying the dragon. The dragon down here is cannot be seen very well, but it's definitely, you can see the tail of the dragon here. An awful lot of detail and work has gone into the making of this one. We then pass on to, oh, by the way, that last one was in memory of Jane Futner and her son Arthur. Her son Arthur died a few months after Jane herself. And the Futner family were a prominent family in Romsey in the law, wine, and law, and were local wine merchants as well. I think most solicitors are somehow associated with wine, aren't they? Right, windows by Kemp. Oh, windows by Kemp. Let's just go back one. Windows by the artist Kemp were, he didn't sign them in the bottom right-hand corner, but all of his work usually featured wheatsheaf or peacock feathers. As you can see in this one, they're illustrated quite frequently within the picture itself, the peacock feathers all the way around. It's indicative of his work. Right, moving on. This window is by Clayton and Bell, a major manufacturer of stained glass windows, and it's in memory of local lawyer George Footner. Again, the same Footner family. It's a 3-panel window. It's on the north side of the church. And this is another highly detailed Clayton and Bell window from the 1870s. This is one of a pair of windows by Kemp, installed in 1910, and it's in memory of Evelyn Ashley from Broadlands. Many of the windows around Romsey Abbey were installed by members of the Ashley, Mountbatten and Temple families from Broadlands. This one, it contains incredible detail.
Click the photo before you speak.
This is a second one of the same pair that I mentioned, again by Kemp, but the detail is quite amazing. This one is in memory of Evelyn Ashley. He was a barrister and a Liberal politician and grandfather of Lady Mountbatten. This one is the oldest stained glass window in the Abbey. It's a 16th century stained glass, and it was rescued from a church in Rouen, France. And it was donated in 1975 by a local family in memory of Captain Charles Neal, who was a member of the RAF Voluntary Reserve Battalion. That's about all I know about him, I'm afraid. Um, 14, 15, it's 15. This is a James Powell window, and it's one of 2 windows in memory of Georgina Tollemache of Broadlands. As I said before, a lot of the windows have originated because of members of the families at Broadlands. This is a window by James Powell and one of a pair, and it's in memory of Ralph Heneage Dutton, hence the name of the road in Romsey called Dutton's Road, which leads up to the station. Ralph Dutton was a member of Parliament, and his likeness is depicted in the right-hand disciple here. Is a pair of windows, and if we go to the next one, you'll see he's also represented in the left-hand disciple at the table with Jesus. I find it difficult to understand why people depict themselves in such a way, but I guess everybody to their own, I guess. If we move on from this to 19. This is a James Powell window showing the three Marys with Christ. It's unusual to find anything showing all three Marys. It's dedicated to Giles Tyler. Tyler was the Romsey town clerk and solicitor.
You must do the picture before you say it, because
this window is a rather beautiful one. In fact, it's an extremely beautiful one. It was by Frank Mayer from Munich, Germany. And it was installed in memory of Caroline Knoll. Caroline was the youngest of 5 daughters of the Reverend Gerald Knoll. He was a vicar of Romsey. She was bedridden for most of her life, but was renowned for writing hymns. A beautiful piece of craftsmanship. This brings us on to the 21st window. It's a James Powell window installed in 1891. Colours are a little bit muted. This window is fairly recent. It was installed in 1950, and it's by the artist Hugh Easton. He's left his hallmark in the bottom right-hand corner. If I enlarge it for you, you can probably see down in this corner a weather vane pointing east. East, obviously, for Easton, which was his name. Hugh Easton. Quite unlike any of the other windows around the Abbey. Quite modern, yet full of religious symbolism. This powerful scene is the only window in the Abbey by the company of Ward and Hughes, and it was installed in 1878. This brings us to window 24, which is this one here. And you're probably thinking, well, it's not a very good photograph. Well, you're absolutely right, it's not. We've got another photograph here, which is even worse. The thing is, it doesn't exist anymore. Each panel measured 39 feet by 6 feet. But it no longer exists because it was damaged during a gale in 1961. And the remnants of it are believed to be in storage in Winchester. These 2 photographs are the only 2 I've managed to come across, which gives a vague idea of what it used to look like. It was installed, again, by members at Broadlands. If anybody comes across this window, photographs of this window, bearing in mind it's usually known as the Great West Window. Today it's been replaced by plain glass. And finally, we've come to a pair of windows at the east end of the church. Again, huge windows, full of detail. And it's dedicated to Lord Mount Temple. He was a Liberal British MP for Hereford for 33 years, and he died in 1888. He was part of the family at Broadlands by way of being the stepson of Prime Minister Lord Palmerston. And Lord Palmerston was the second of 2 prime ministers that his mother had married. And well, therein lies a much longer and more complicated story, which is full of scandal and not for me to speak about. The window was designed by Dutch artist Van Elk, or Eyck, E-Y-C-K, Dutch artist Van Eyck, and it was crafted by the James Powell and Sons Company in 1890. The subject of the window is inspired by the temple name, and so hence we have Christ sitting on the throne in the temple surrounded by various people. If I go in a little bit closer, you will see it's, oops, if I can get it. A lot of the people are local dignitaries, including the inventor and vicar Bertham. This is the centre of the second of those two windows. And it forms the main centrepiece behind the altar, behind the main altar, and well worth standing and looking at the detail of it. And that, I am pleased to say, brings us to the end of today's sermon and to your visit to Romsey Abbey. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Roy. We've got one or two questions. Elizabeth has asked, if you made a window today, would it be the same as it was made 100 years ago or 200 years ago?
By and large, yes. And I can answer that because I've spoken with Sophie Hacker, who made the Nightingale window, which was installed in October of last year. And she used very similar techniques. But in her window, it wasn't purely stained glass. She also incorporated some over etching and over painting in order to get some of the shading.
So some of the faces look almost like photographs, you know.
Don't they? Particularly that one of Bertham.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure. It was etched into ordinary glass and etched with a dark paint.
Right. Well, what's the oldest window in the Abbey then, Roy?
From memory, I think it was 1864.
Quite recent. Yeah.
There were older windows, but for reasons we can't discover, they were removed. We do have a couple of photographs of windows which no longer exist, but we don't have photographs of the detail. We just make out that they are stained glass windows which have been replaced with plain glass.
Right. And what's the newest window in the Abbey?
Well, the newest one is the one for Nightingale.
Oh, yes.
October.
James asked if the Footner name is the same, is associated with the sisters, Ewing Footner.
Yes. Did you say solicitors or sisters?
Solicitors.
Yeah, it's a law firm. They've been in the town for many, many years.
Right. Have we got any more questions, guys? Elizabeth?
Not a question, thank you, but thank you very much, Roy, for answering the question. The reason I asked was because the company I used to work with had a Victorian conservatory that was stained glass. So it was quite interesting to see it really close up.
Elena asks, Roy, thank you for the presentation. Is there a correlation in between your name and the name of Romsey the town? That's an interesting one, isn't it? Yes.
Let's stick with the subject of stained glass windows, shall we?
They didn't call the town after you then, okay.
I don't think they named the Albert Hall after you either.
Steady on. Any more questions, guys? I think you floored everybody, Roy. But that was tremendous. I'll just hand over to the Speaker Secretary then.
All right. Well, it's my pleasure to thank Roy for being our speaker tonight, because when I mentioned in a meeting that we didn't have a speaker for this day, Roy immediately emailed me back and volunteered to be our speaker tonight. So many thanks for doing that. So it was very interesting to hear about some of the history of Romsey Abbey. And next time I go there, I will take more care to look around and especially take note of the stained glass windows, because I think, having walked around many cathedrals and churches and looked at stained glass windows, and unless somebody was telling me what I was looking at, I was just looking at the lovely colours and the sort of people that you could see in there. And so now I think we have a better idea about the history of stained glass windows, who paid for them, and who actually made them, and to actually see a little thing on the bottom and know that is somebody's name. It's quite interesting to be able to look for that when you go around looking at the windows. So you picked out an odd little item, which was a ball of knitting wool in there, which presumably meant something to the people who were in the picture, but maybe we'll never know what it was. And the new window dedicated to the bicentenary of Florence Nightingale, it's got lots of little detail that you don't really see until somebody's pointed it out to you, because it's quite small and it's not very colourful, is it? In fact, the whole stained glass window's not very colourful.
That's very true.
So it's quite different from a lot that you'd see now in the churches that were very bright, and some of the blues and the reds and the yellows. I mean, there's such vivid colours when you think it's a stained glass. So you obviously have a great interest in and understanding of the background and the information contained within the windows, and obviously you've spent a lot of time learning about this, and obviously enjoy it very much. And so thank you very much indeed, Roy, for coming tonight and speaking to us. And I'd like everyone just to show your appreciation in the usual way.